Okay. All right. I think we're ready to roll. All right. Thank you all so much. I hope that exam was not too painful. People give me looks. This is new. I've not done this before where I give a partial exam and then I go over it immediately. I don't know if this will work well, but I'm going to try it, see how it plays out. Let me share my screen, if I may. Hold on. Someone just chat. It is. You have to go through tools. It's there. It's not obvious. Yeah, there's a button next to the word limit. You have to click it. It's there. If you couldn't figure it out, you have to take a sample exam, which is why you don't have to physically count every word. But that's backup if you have to. Yeah, but it's there, right? You have to click on it. Okay. So I want to share my screen. Let me just make this point more broadly. A couple of you had difficulties with the exam software, and I appreciate that. I think what I'm just going to do for the future, not that this helps you, is just have people type it in Word and email me a Word document. I'm kind of sick of all these, special things you have to do with Zoom and ExamSoft. It's just so much extra crap for you to do that I think next semester, if we're still in Zoom world, hopefully not, I'll just ask people to use a Word document. So I apologize if you had technical difficulties. It's such a pain in the neck to set this up. It's very difficult. Okay. All right. Okay. Where's my Zoom? Okay.
Professor?
Yeah. Who's talking now?
A clicker. Sorry.
Oh no. You don't need attendance today. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for asking that, Macy. Yeah. When I'm in screen share mode, I don't always see who's talking, so I apologize. Okay. So what I'd like to do is walk you through the exam. Specifically, I'd like to walk you through it the way I think you should approach the exam. So the midterm was only an hour, 60 minutes. There were 3 questions, and you had a 600-word limit. The final will be much longer. You'll have 3 hours. And you'll have 2 separate parts, part 1 and part 2. Each part will have 5 questions. And each part will have a 1,000-word limit. So the total exam should be about 2,000 words. And the reason why I use the word limit, and people kind of hate it, is to create a fair way to judge you. I know full well that some students can type more than others. That's just how things go. Some students can, dump 3,000 words in an hour, and other students can't. I am not rewarding what I call the spaghetti approach, where you just throw a bowl of spaghetti at the wall hoping something sticks, right? Hoping you find points somewhere. I want you all to give me what you think is the best answer, the right answer, and not just stumble into an answer. And the word limit forces you. This is not about me being lazy. If I was lazy, I'd give you multiple choice. And I would reuse the questions every year. I don't do that. I write a new exam question for the final every year. So this is not my way of saving time. In fact, it takes a lot more time. I don't know if you know this, but the school is considering compressing the grading period to help with fall recruiting. I don't mind. I think it's actually a good idea. But basically, I'll have 2.5 weeks to grade 150 papers, which may not sound like a lot, but it is. It takes a lot of time. So this is not Josh trying to save time. If I wanted to save time, I would give you multiple choice. Yeah, in fact, I think one of the consequences of compressing the grading period is that professors may use more multiple choice, which may not actually be helpful for you. So it may help students with jobs, but hurt them with assessment. So there's always these sorts of trade-offs. All right, so I want to go through the exam, if I can. On the exam, there's going to be 2 types of questions. One type of question is set in the present day. The year is 2020. And you get to use all the law that exists as of the day the question's issued, or at least the case we've discussed. I don't expect you to discuss Supreme Court cases decided last week. I think that would be unfair. But at least the recent case we've discussed from 2020. So, for example, the tax return cases decided a few months ago, right? Those would be fair game. The other type of question I'll give you is different. It is a historical question, where I will situate you at some point in the past. And I usually pick a year that there was something specific going on, right? Maybe it'll be during the Civil War. Maybe it'll be during World War II. Maybe it'll be during the Watergate scandal. Maybe during the Iraq War. Whatever it happens to be, I'll put you in a period of time. And the consequence of that sort of question is that you cannot consider new cases decided after that date. If this is an 1812 question, you should not be discussing cases from 2020 or 1936. Right? Now, Josh, why are you doing this to me? Why are you making me learn in such a stupid way? Right? Well, I want to test you of how doctrine developed. If I ask you about modern era, you say, oh, well, here's Gonzalez v. Raich, or here's NFIB versus Sibelius. But you ignore how the law developed over the course of 200 years. I want to see you know all the steps, right? Remember in elementary school math, you have to show your work, right? You can't just skip to the final answer. I want you to show your steps. And that's why I set you in the past. And so in this exam, I put you in the year 1812. Now, there's nothing significant about 1812. There was a war that year, the War of 1812, which you don't need to know about. It's not important, but there was a war. And the setup was that you are an advisor to President Madison. And he's asked you to prepare a memorandum of 600 words addressing 3 questions. Again, on the final, it would be 5, but I just made it 3, so you would have more. We'd be able to finish it in a more reasonable period of time. All right, so let's read question number 1. I'll read it out loud for everyone, and you can see it on your screen. Okay. President Madison learns that the United Kingdom is secretly importing rifles across the Atlantic Ocean into Canadian ports. Okay, so right away, for the very first sentence, the wheels on the bus, no, the wheels in your head just start going round and round. And you're thinking, wait a minute. We're dealing with stuff being shipped over the ocean. What provision of the Constitution discusses shipping stuff over the ocean? And you should be thinking about the Commerce Clause, but not the Interstate Commerce Clause, the Foreign Commerce Clause. Right? The Commerce Clause applies to foreign nations among the several states and Indian tribes. But wait a minute, Josh, we never studied any cases about the Foreign Commerce Clause. So what? It's in the Constitution. Deal with it. And I mean that literally, right? You're in 1812. You don't even have Gibbons v. Ogden yet. Has not been yet decided. So you have to basically start with the text of the Constitution. This is why I'm giving you this sort of question. I want you to think about these issues as a matter of first principles. Okay, so it says, President Madison learns that the UK is secretly importing rifles across the Atlantic Ocean into Canadian ports. So it's not even being put into American ports, it's being put into Canadian ports. Then the rifles are being transported across the Canadian border into the western frontier. So you have like double foreign commerce from the UK to Canada, from Canada across the border. Once in the frontier, and again, the frontier is land that's not settled by the United States. It's not owned. So it's sort of just frontier. The rifles are given to Indians. Again, it's the Canadians giving rifles to the Indians. Then the Indians smuggle the weapons into the States. So then you have Indians coming into the States, and now you have interstate commerce as well. And then you learn once inside Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, which are the frontier states, the Indians would attack the settlers. And occasionally the Indians would sell the rifles to settlers. So you're asking yourself, is the movement of the rifles interstate commerce? Is the local sale of the rifles interstate commerce? Okay, then we learn that Congress enacts a law. And I love acronyms, I'm sorry, they're always very corny, but I make them work. The Sire Act. The Stop Importation of Rifles from England Act. And it's a simple statute, one sentence. It says, it shall be a felony to possess a rifle that was transported from foreign nations or among the several states, or with the Indian tribes, without the consent of Congress. So the setup is you're not in a court. This is not what Chief Justice Marshall thinks. It's President Madison, who's the president, doesn't know if he should sign it. He has doubts about the constitutionality of the bill. And he wants you to write about it. Now, how do you go about writing about this question, right? Well, things you have to think about, right? Do you have any cases? Not really, right? McCulloch had not yet been decided. Gibbons had not yet been decided. You have Marbury, but that's not really relevant to your studies. It doesn't really affect this case at all. You're not in a court. So you have to think about this issue from first principles. So what is commerce, right? Well, Gibbons for sure gave a definition of commerce, but Marshall didn't make that up. I think you can understand commerce meant intercourse, right? It meant the exchange of goods. That's how the phrase was understood back then. Was simple possession of the gun commerce? Was the local sale of a gun commerce? Now, so far I've only talked about the Commerce Clause, but you always have to think about your other provision, which is a necessary and proper clause. You do not have McCulloch, but you have the debates about the Bank of the United States. That was something that James Madison opined on. Remember that Madison and Jefferson took a very narrow view of necessary and proper powers, and Hamilton took a broad view. Perhaps you could argue that Congress's necessary and proper powers allow them to prohibit the possession of a rifle, right? And think of it this way, right? It's impossible for Congress to, put ships in these seas and stop the ships from importing the rifles, but they can maybe go about this problem differently. They can regulate the local possession of the rifle as a way to prohibit the interstate shipment. Can you do that? How broad is the necessary and proper power? It sounds like E.C. Knight, which is what I was kind of thinking of, right? Can you prohibit the local possession to try to ban the interstate shipment? But E.C. Knight wasn't yet decided. But you can still think about it in the same sort of ways, right? So here, you don't have a lot to go on. What I wanted to see you think about is, what is commerce? What does foreign commerce mean, right? Is possession of a gun commerce? Is transportation of a gun from the frontier to a state commerce among the several states? What role does necessary and proper play in this? Do you take a broad or a narrow view of necessary and proper? Right? These are all issues that I think you can discuss credibly. But it's not obvious, right? I have told you this many times, your notes are not going to help you. There's absolutely nothing in your outline that could have helped you answer this question, unless you understood this sort of history. Okay? All right, so questions are number one. I'll pause the screen sharing for a second. Question number one. Yeah, Macy, go ahead.
How do you decide which one of those issues is the most important one to talk about? So for this example, we had, if you split up the 600 words, 200 words for that one question, you could have possibly talked about all the things you just talked about in 200 words. I tried.
Let me give you an answer that I think is fair. Most students don't think of all the things I think of. Maybe you did, which is fine. But when I write an answer key, or what I call a memo about the exam, I maybe think of maybe 5 or 6 things to write about. The 8+ paper maybe gets 2 or 3 of them. So the short answer is you're not going to. You may think of maybe 1 or 2 of those things. That's probably enough to write. Maybe Lainey says maybe Macy did. Maybe you'll surprise me, but usually I think of a lot more issues than students ever come up with, and that's just been my experience. If you're able to come up with 3 of them, you're probably in good shape.
So it's not about finding the one that's most important. It's about being right in the ones you address.
I think so. Yeah, there's no one right answer, which is why I don't like multiple choice. I don't think there's ever one right answer to a ConLaw question. It's just it doesn't fit. To be frank, I'll circulate later the memo for this one. I'll send it around later. But I encourage you when you go through the older exams to look at the A+ answer and try and see what they wrote. I don't have an A+ answer for this one, and I'll explain to you the reason why. This was based on my exam from last semester, which was an exam given on Zoom University for no credit. And let me just tell you, the exams were not great. I could not in good conscience award an A+ last semester because exams were just not very good. And I don't know how your exams are. Maybe yours were spectacular. But with no credit, the credit, no credit business, the exam sucked. So I don't have an A+ one for this one because I couldn't do it. It didn't feel right for me. But in past semesters, you'll see. I often think the A+ answers are not very good, which it's an awful thing to say, but they miss things. But you grade on a curve, so you're judging against your peers. So you don't have to get everything. I'm not asking you to do that.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Lainey, go ahead.
I missed the initial discussion about word count. It's okay to go over 200 words if we are saving those words in the next two answers.
Well, I would not recommend you do that because how do you know you're saving? How can you possibly know how many words you'll need for another question? In other words...
Well, I didn't, but I would just have to go back and edit later.
No, you don't want to edit because then you run out of time. I would limit yourself to 200 words per question because you don't know what's coming later. Maybe you really know question number 1 well, and question number 2, you have no clue. And then you've burned yourself wasting time and wasting words. The worst thing you could do is go back and delete stuff because you're killing time. Budget yourself, both in time and in word count. And let me explain what this means. Right? Let's just use this example because it's easy. You had an hour for 3 questions, right? Okay, well that means 20 minutes per question. But not exactly. Because you have to read the question first. So let's say you take 10 minutes to read the question, right? Maybe make 20 minutes to read the question. Let's just take it slow. That means you have 40 minutes left over for 3 questions. That's about 10 minutes and change per question. You should be allocating your time and your word count based on the exam. My exams are very predictable, which is something that you don't always get. I'm telling you exactly how many questions you'll have, how much time you'll have, and how many words you have. Take advantage of that, right? Use that. If you know that you have 1,000 words, don't say, all right, 400 words for the first one, and I always go back and delete later because you'll run out of time. You want to finish numbers 3, 4, and 5. 200 words. Again, people say the word count. 200 words is basically about a paragraph. 6 or 7 sentences. I mean, you can check your own writing, right? We're not talking a lot. If they're long sentences, 4 or 5 sentences, but usually 6 or 7 sentences, maybe a paragraph, about this much text. Right? I mean, just to give you a sense, let me do a screen share again. Okay, so question 1, I've highlighted for you. This is 150 words. It's not very much. It's almost 200 words. Okay, this question, 160, right? It's not very much. By the way, I want you to become familiar with word counts because as attorneys, every brief you ever write for any court will have a word count. I don't care what jurisdiction you have, a page count or word count, right? You think 2,000 words for an exam is stingy? I've tried a Supreme Court brief with 6,000 words. A Supreme Court brief with 6,000 words. That's all I have to work with. Don't complain about 2,000 words. It's more than enough. But you have to be very attuned to word counts. Because let me tell you something. If you put a court and you go over the word count and what the court does, they'll strike the brief. They'll say anything over 1,000, we stop reading. Good luck with that. Telling that to your client. Good luck. Explain that why they only read half your brief. And some courts, if you really abuse the word limits, will hold you into contempt. I'm not joking you. There's some judges that are very stringent on the word limit. So I actually feel justified in being a stickler about this. So no, budget equal time for each question and budget equal words for each question. Lainey, if at the end you say you have all this extra time, then go back and add more, right? But I would not chance it by trying to divide yourself up that way. Okay. I saw someone else had a hand up. Was that Jose? I saw another hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, that was me. I think I'm having trouble making the distinction between like being in a certain time frame, and then also what you said about like being able to almost predict what happened in the future.
Yeah.
So how do you want us to just to address that? I think I'm having trouble with that distinction.
It's a very good question. I get this question every year. So here's what you don't do. Don't cite EC9, right? That would be bad. Here's what you can do. You could say, the power to regulate commerce does not include the power to ban simple possession, right? The word commerce embraces things moving around between states, but merely possessing something is not commerce. So you're relying on ideas that come later, but not using the cases. It's a very subtle distinction. I think if you look at some of the old exams, you'll see how this is done. But the issue, and I'll give you an example. This is not something that was crazy. Remember the DeWitt case, right? Could Congress ban the sale of oil that's local, right? The court said there that local transactions are not interstate commerce. You can say that without having to rely on the case. There's a question in the chat. What about the state police power? Yeah, I think that's a fair point, that when Congress is banning something, it prevents the states from doing it as well. So yeah, there are lots of different angles you can approach. There's no one right way. Jose, does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, yes, sir. And I did notice that going over the old exams. I was like, wait, they're definitely applying law that's not in this time frame. But so I kind of got the point. I just wasn't sure how you wanted us to address it.
You have to do it in a way. Pretend you're actually a law clerk in the 1800s, and you're sort of thinking about issues, right? There's nothing new. All of the issues during the New Deal were discussed in the 1800s, right? These are not new issues. They were just sort of looked at differently. Okay, thanks, Jose. All right. Questions on number one? No? All right, let me put the dreaded screen sharing back on. I really hate the screen share because it screws up my entire screen. Everything becomes hidden. All right. Can everyone see me okay? Okay. Where's my participants? All right. So here's number 2. Oh, by the way, a few people last semester wrote about the Second Amendment for question number 1. I was like, where did you get that? We don't even cover the Second Amendment. I appreciate it, but that wasn't what I was looking for. All right, so here's question number 2. It's actually question 2 and 3. It's a joint fact pattern, so it's a little bit easier on you, less to read. Okay, so then things escalate. The House and the Senate approve a declaration of war against the United Kingdom, which President Madison signed. Now, you don't have any cases on the declare war clause, but we've talked about it in class, right? Congress declares war, and the president's the commander-in-chief. We talked about this in the context of Korematsu, right, where Congress declared war against Japan, and that gave the president certain authority on the home front. In Youngstown, there was no declaration of war, and the president did not have that power on the home front. So it's not obvious that we've talked about it, but we actually did. And that's why knowing these cases so cold becomes important. All right, so the declaration says that war is hereby declared to exist between the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland and the dependencies thereof and the United States of America and their territories. I think this is actually the text of the declaration. I maybe tweaked it a little bit. This was the actual text. And that the President of the United States is hereby authorized to use the whole land and naval forces of the United States to carry the same into effect. What is that? We would call that a delegation of power, right? That Congress is declaring war and is delegating to the executive the whole power, the whole everything to prosecute the war. Okay. This is very similar to what happened with FDR in World War II. They gave rise to Kawamatsu. All right, so the next sentence begins. James Monroe, the Secretary of War, prepares a draft executive order for the president's signature. Although James Monroe became president later, he was after Madison. The order has 2 sections. Always pay attention when I say there are multiple sections, because usually each section is a different question. That's why I divvy the question up like that. So again, this is the Secretary of War giving the president order to sign. And section 1 says, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War to seize all rifles that were transported from foreign nations or among the several states or with Indian tribes without the consent of Congress. I'll do section 1 first. So the question is, discuss the constitutionality of section 1 of the order. Right? So this is a preview of things that had not yet happened. This, I think, is Jose's question a few minutes ago. President Truman's seizure of the steel mill. Right? Where President Truman signed an executive order that gave Secretary Sawyer, right, the power to seize the steel mills. And we know what happened in Youngstown. Congress did not give a statute that authorized the president to seize the mills. There was no declaration of war against Korea. So that we were in, as Justice Jackson would say, the third zone, right? The third tier. The president has no statutory power, so he can only rely on his own constitutional authority. But then we have Korematsu, where Congress declares war against Japan, and then President Roosevelt issues Executive Order 9066. Right? And Executive Order 9066 gave the Secretary, the Western Command General, DeWitt, the power to do things that he needs to do. They were very vague. But in that case, we were more or less in the first tier, where the president had both congressional authority and his own constitutional authority. So where are we here, right? What powers does the president have? And again, you don't need to talk about Youngstown, but I think as a most basic level, the president has powers, and they got to come from somewhere. And you would ask, does this declaration of war give the president the power to seize property? Does the president have the inherent constitutional power in his own right to seize property? Keep in mind the Fifth Amendment was ratified at this point. It was a takings clause. We learned about this in Barron v. Baltimore, right? When the government seizes property, they have to provide just compensation. Is there any provision in this statute to provide compensation from those whose property was seized? Can the president even pay compensation on his own? Which branch of government is responsible for paying compensation? That would be the Congress. So even apart from whether the president has the power to issue this order, there's probably a takings violation of the Fifth Amendment. Again, no outline will help you answer this question. You would just need to know the facts of Barron v. Baltimore to follow the takings clause. It's just, the way I read these exams is it really forces you to think about the cases holistically, how they interact. This is why making an open book is irrelevant. Also, I confirmed I do not need to keep the camera on for your final exam. So you will not have your camera on for the final exam. You're welcome. But nothing will help you. Notes won't help you. Chatting with your friend will likely even waste your time. So I don't think this is a tough exam to cheat on. One year I had students who wrote something very similar, and I did investigate. It turned out they studied together. They prepared an outline together, and they basically wrote canned answers that they would just prepare to use, and they basically copied from their outline. So, okay, whatever. But it's a hard example to cheat on. Yeah, Lainey, see your hands up.
So in the example you were just talking about with Barron v. Baltimore, I thought our test question was set in 1812.
Oh, I'm sorry. What year was Barron? Oh, okay. Yeah.
1833?
You just nailed me on that one. You're right.
And thank you for no camera during the final.
You're welcome. You know what? I'm sorry. I screwed up there. I did the thing I said you're not supposed to do. Barron had not yet been decided, but the Fifth Amendment was ratified. So you could, right. So you could talk about whether the Fifth Amendment was implicated, right? Even if you don't have Barron, the federal government was still bound by the Fifth Amendment. So I apologize. That was my mistake. See, I screw up also. It's true. It's true. Okay.
Quick question, Professor.
Yes, go ahead. Who's that? Gavin, yeah, please, go ahead.
So within question 1, you said it was set in 1812, so I knew to look at it as if a historical setting. Did you mean the same for questions 2 and 3 as well? I assume because you did not put a year that we were, although it's a context that's in the past.
Look at the exam. Oops, I'm sorry. I mean, look at the exam. The instructions for all of part 1.
Oh, okay. I thought the instructions were just for question 1. That's my bad. I'll read better next time.
Yeah, no. You got to read better. That's the year is for the entirety of the question, the entirety of part 1. Someone mentioned citing the Federalist Papers. Absolutely. Federalist 70 discusses the vigor of the executive, where Federalist 78 mentions the power of the purse and the power of the sword. I think those are all fair points to mention. Without question, there are things you should be discussing from the founding year that you can bring in. A lot of students sort of have a cheat sheet of stuff from the founding era that they can plug in very easily. And you might consider doing something like that. There are ways you can prepare for this exam. Things that are predictably asked. I very often will ask questions during the 1800s, and then you can just be ready for that. The reason why I do that is to see how you respond without having cases to discuss. I'm sorry. I knew Barron was in the 1830s. I just had a brain lapse. It's been a very long week. I have 2 Supreme Court briefs due next week in a very short period of time. So it's a bit of a blur for me. Yeah, Macy, go ahead.
Are you okay with us discussing founding fathers' original opinions, from Federalist Papers and stuff, just to give us kind of a baseline of what they probably would have thought?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think that's very strong. We haven't discussed a lot of those debates, but we did discuss some of them. And I'll tell you, Macy, what really separates the B paper from the A paper consistently is the ability to bring in some of these outside sources that aren't obvious. That really is kind of like the icing on the cake that really pushes papers over the top, because that shows me that not only were you able to purchase a commercial outline to learn all the cases, but you actually embraced the entirety of this American experiment, right? All the things we've talked about, and that's for good and for evil. We're about to start in class on I guess Monday, the 14th Amendment, and this class is going to take a very different direction. If you think that the Commerce Clause stuff is sort of vague, wait till we get to the 14th Amendment. It's a different world. We're talking about slavery and segregation, and the views of the framers of the 14th Amendment were often very different than how the court interpreted the 14th Amendment, right? The framers of the 14th Amendment were very much against slavery, very much against segregation. And then in a short period of time, the Supreme Court sort of read the 14th Amendment narrowly of decisions like Plessy and Dred Scott before, but you have Plessy and a few other cases that sort of contracted the 14th Amendment. And I think what you'll find is the understanding of those who drafted the amendments don't always match up with those of the Supreme Court. And it's absolutely appropriate and commendable to bring these sources in. That makes sense, Macy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And very good questions. I'm happy to take all of your questions. I like this. I think I'm going to do this every year. The sort of the short midterm with the review right after, because it's sort of fresh in your head. I think this actually works well. I didn't know how it worked, but I'm actually quite pleased with it. Okay. Any other questions on number one? I'm sorry, question number two. Any else on question number two? Okay, let me go on to question number three. Oh, screen sharing, how I hate you. Okay. ConLaw. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, number three. All right, so this question number three is based on Executive Order Part 2, Section 2. So it's a little bit complicated to keep things in your head, but I think you're all bright students. You can figure this along. Okay. So again, this is Secretary of War gives a draft order to the President, and the order says, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War, Monroe, to take such other steps.
Excuse me, Professor, that's not what we see. I don't know if you're showing us what you want us to see from your screen.
Okay. I'm sorry. That's why I hate screen sharing. Okay, Elaine, are you seeing the right thing now?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so again, I'll read it again. The Secretary of War gives an executive order for the President's signature, and it says, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War to take such other steps as he may deem advisable to enforce compliance with Section 1 of the Executive Order. Whoa, right? Whoa. Section 1 at least gives some, guidance that says, seize the rifles, whatever else. Like there's some specificity. Section 2 is do whatever the hell you want. Do whatever you want, and that's fine. Do whatever you think is advisable. This order actually sort of resembles the order given to General DeWitt in the Korematsu case. Because Roosevelt didn't tell them, okay, go lock up Japanese people in internment camps. He's like, well, take the steps you think are necessary, knowing full well what the general wanted to do. Okay, but then the question says below, it says, President Madison learns that the Secretary of War, plans to detain Indians captured on the frontier who refuse to surrender their rifles. Again, the order says take whatever steps you need to ensure compliance with Section 1. So here I'm saying that Indians refusing to give up their guns on the frontier, they will be detained. Basically meant put in a camp or a prison or whatever you want to describe it as. So then it says, in light of this plan, discuss the constitutionality of section number 2. So there's a lot you can discuss here. And again, this was, I think, Macy's question a moment ago. I don't expect you to get all these things. If you get a couple of them, I'd be happy. But most students didn't. So one issue to think about is the due process clause. When we talk about this in Korematsu, the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment says that the government can deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Right here, people are being detained without any process whatsoever. They're just being locked up. But does the due process clause apply on the frontier? Does it apply to non-citizens? Indians are not citizens. Talk about that. The 3/5 clause, for example, excludes Indians from citizenship. Right? This is actually a very difficult question, right? Whether the Constitution applies outside the boundaries of the United States, that's a hard question. Laura asked, are we supposed to know the 3/5 clause? Yep. Talk about the first day of class. My friend, everything's fair game. It's fair game. We talked about it. Again, the text of the Constitution is absolutely fair game. You should know it cold. And that's why I put this question here in the midterm to sort of drill that point into your heads. We never discussed the Foreign Commerce Clause much, but it's there. Right? It's fair game. The facts of the case say you have a declaration of war against the United Kingdom. Does that declaration extend to the Indians? That's a factual question, which is not really law-based, but you can think about it. Does a declaration against the UK give them the right to attack the Indians? There's another issue that I think you could talk about. The executive power belongs to the president, right? The executive power actually vests in the president, right? That's right there in the Constitution. Can the executive branch, can the president delegate to the Secretary of War basically absolute discretion to do whatever he wants? Right? Whose job is it? Is it the commander-in-chief's job or the Secretary of War? What kind of supervision is there? Are there any limits of the delegation? Right? This was a hard question. And if you got maybe one of those issues, I would have been happy. Most students really struggle with this one. But I want to see how people would fare with it. It was a hard question. Very hard question. All right. Thoughts on number 3? Yeah, Cassie says I hated that question. I don't blame you. Yeah, Brigitte?
I took a little bit of a different perspective of this in that, like, I took the war powers one step further and used the Sire Act and the, like, theoretical constitutionality of the Sire Act. Said that the secretary was acting under color of the executive order, but also an enforcement of the congressional act.
That's good. That's actually really good. Yeah. So you're saying that he wasn't acting only under the executive order, but based on the statute, which gives even more. That's an excellent answer. Really good. And let me make this point. I don't always think of all the possible answers. Every year when I grade the exams, like, wow, I didn't think of it. That's good. Right? If I make a really good fact pattern, every year I know it's a good fact pattern if there are things that people come up with that I didn't think of. Excellent. Yeah, very good. Yeah, Jose, your hands up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Being that you said that the framers were pretty, anti-discrimination, should we have predicted, I guess, the strict scrutiny that was applied by the federal court? By the Supreme Court.
Well, how would you? What provision of the Constitution would that be based on? The Due Process Clause?
Yeah,
you could say that. Yeah. I think the response to that is the Constitution specifically says Indians are not citizens. So that sort of puts them in a different category. But I think you'd absolutely discuss whether it's an arbitrary law to only apply to one category of people. I think you can absolutely say that. We'll do a lot more due process later, so this question might make a little bit more sense, but I think you still answer it based on your halfway point of your semester. Okay. All right, questions number 3. Question number 3. Let me take a step back. I haven't actually gotten your papers yet. They usually email them to me at some point later. I'm going to circulate a memo, maybe today or so, so maybe a little bit later, that shows you how I think you should answer the questions. It's not set in stone, right? There's not one right answer. I would like to meet with you all to go over your exams. And I think the way I'll have this done is I'll have my secretary email you your exam, which then you can then review it on your own. But I'll give you the grade in person. I don't know if this will work. I'm going to try it. I'm trying different things this semester, but I want to give people an incentive. I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do Zoom meetings with 150 students. It's not ideal. There's no good way of doing it. I know you all have class during the week. You have jobs. You have internships. I think what I'll probably do is have different open periods, weekends and nights. I don't know exactly when. I'll figure out the details. And there'll be a Zoom queue, and I'll talk to each one of you. I used to do this in person, where I would meet with every student in my office, and I would basically come in on a Saturday, stay from 9 till 9 p.m., and then on a Sunday from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. I do this for a couple weekends. I cannot do that. That's not legally possible with the COVID regulations. So it will be something similar with Zoom office hours over some period of time. But I would like to meet with every one of you by the end of the semester, at least once, to go over it. Someone asked, are you going to grade it amongst our peers, or it could have been a grade? I'll answer this question candidly. It's very hard to give a grade for a midterm because people prepare at different levels. For the final, I think people prepare fairly consistently. And usually a grade is based on a curve. So if it's, last semester was the Zoom University, the curve sucked. I am grateful that I didn't have to give grades because no one deserved a good grade. I'm sorry. I'm being honest with you. I can only be honest. So on a midterm, it's like Zoom University because it doesn't count. So I would give you what I think your grade would have been, which is not exactly what it would be with a curve, but it's like if this was your final, here's where you would be. And that's the best I can give you. I can't do a strict curve for a midterm because the distribution is not accurate. There's some students who are overachievers, you are, and you came ready to go. And there's some students like, yeah, whatever, I'll see how I do. Don't really take it seriously. And I can't possibly curve those two sets of people. It's just unfair. But I will give you, it's about a B, it's about an A, maybe it's a C, or this is an F, or this is a D, right? I can at least give you in the ballpark. And I'm happy to. I think I mentioned this in class once, but the midterm grades are usually the final grades. People tend not to move around very much. Maybe you go from a B minus to a B plus, or a C to a C plus, or an A to an A minus. There's some variation, but not a terrible lot. Right, that is, people who overachieve for the midterm tend to overachieve for the final, and people who slack for the midterm tend to slack for the final, and that's history. That's how the world works in this college. I can only tell you from teaching now for however many years I've been teaching. So I can only be honest with you. I'm giving you whatever resources I have, and it's up to you to actually take advantage of them. Beyond that, you're on your own. Lainey asked me what case I'm working on. It's a case involving the foreign emoluments clauses, which you may have seen in the news. I've been working on this case now for almost 4 years, so it's finally at the Supreme Court, and briefs are due next week, on the 14th, actually. Yep, 2 briefs, 2 cases, 6,000 words each. Don't complain about 2,000 words. I have 6,000 words for a Supreme Court brief. It's just it's just such a small space, and that's like with footnotes and everything else. Okie doke. I'm looking at 49 glazed faces. You're probably all exhausted after Professor Yamamoto's and my exam. You're probably all dying. Yeah, lucky me, it's after Kevin. Yeah, I've actually taught after Kevin a couple semesters. And I once had a night class where Kevin had tax at like 5:30, and then my common class met like at 7:40, and they just walked and they all just looked like they were zombies. They were just like, They just look dead. So at least you're still in daylight hours, so it's not quite as bad. Raymond asks, it's close to the nobility clause, but whether the president can accept certain foreign, what are called emoluments, which the meaning of is disputed, but certain payments perhaps from foreign governments. I've been working on this case forever. Okie doke, everybody. Are there any questions or things on your mind? And I appreciate that you all stayed late beyond 12:10, but I wanted to give you as much as I could. Again, I'm here to help you. I sincerely mean that. I'm not just playing with you. I want you to learn, but you have to meet me halfway and help me out. Help me help you, as the saying goes. All right. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back in class Monday. I think you have a Langdell coming up, and Tyler, I think, will be going over the midterm that I just gave you. Okay? Thank you so much.